Welcome back into the Dynasty Nerds podcast. I am your host, Garret Bryce, here with Andrew Mott. Andrew, how you doing, man?
Doing good, man. Look, we are 1 week away from the fantasy playoffs, and I feel like I got a lot of teams that got a shot this year, so I'm pretty excited going into the last week here.
Yeah, I am too. It's something that I might even do like a video on or something, but this year was probably the year that I was the most rigid on, like, I will not be stuck in the middle. Like, I am either going to truly be all in or I'm going to truly be all out. And it's really paid dividends. Like, I really don't have any teams that are in sixth, seventh type place. It's all either, I'm 11-2, or, or would it be, 11-2, or I am, 2-11. Like, almost all my teams are like that this year, where I'm either a top 3 team in my league or I'm a bottom 3 team, and I'm not really playing the in-between game at all. There is one league where I'm kind of on like the come out of a rebuild, where it kind of ended up right there. But other than that, like, I really put a hard line in the sand of, man, I'm either in or out. And so it is going to be a fun year to kind of see how all of these teams end up playing out, and hopefully it'll be worth it.
Yeah, I think I have one team too that was kind of like yours, where it's like I'm in year 2 of the rebuild, and it felt like the team was starting to get some momentum, and I kind of pulled it back and was like, let's miss the playoffs one more year. So I think I'm the first team out of the playoffs this
Okay.
year. But I kind of pulled that one back, and I decided to do that after Jaden Daniels, who's my starting quarterback, got hurt. And I was like, you know what? Let's just pull this
Logical.
back, sell a guy like Khalil Shakir, sell a guy like somebody else, and just, maybe miss the playoffs just a little bit.
There you go. There you go. All right. Well, speaking of missing the playoffs, we're going to talk about some of our most disappointing players this year. And chances are, if you have a lot of these guys on your team, you did, in fact, miss the playoffs because for one reason or another, these players really, really let us down. And some of them more on a macro scale. Some of us maybe a little bit more on a micro scale, where we might have been a little more invested in this player than maybe the general community. But these players let us down. So, Andrew, we're going to go position by position. We got a guy for each spot. Let's start with your quarterback. Who did you have as the most disappointing quarterback for you in 2025?
Yeah, I think this is going to be more of a player that a lot of people have felt disappointment of this year. And for me, it's going to be Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar Jackson has been one of the most disappointing quarterbacks this season. And not just because of injury. I mean, I look right now, he's quarterback 18. Yes, he's missed 3 games with that hamstring injury. But this is also a player that, from a fantasy points per game perspective, has averaged 17.6 fantasy points per game this year, which is 15th best in the NFL. So to give you perspective of what that looks like in your lineup each week, when it comes to Lamar Jackson scoring points, he's right there in a bucket with Trevor Lawrence, who's averaging 17.3, Brock Purdy, who's averaging 17, and Jacoby Brissett, who's averaged 16.6, which is just 1 point less than Lamar Jackson this year. And if you had Lamar Jackson on your fantasy teams, that is not what you signed up for with Lamar Jackson. You wanted him to be in the Josh Allen, 24, 25 fantasy points per game type of bucket, where he would be a difference maker week in and week out. And he has not been that this year, even in the games that he's been healthy. And I think what even makes it harder for a guy like Lamar Jackson is you look at the last month of the fantasy season. He's come back from injury, and it's time for those teams that had Lamar Jackson, who probably struggled while he was out for the 3 weeks of the season, to say, hey, we got to make a push now where Lamar Jackson has a pretty decent schedule. He should be able to take advantage of some matchups. And then during that push, that playoff push that you needed from him, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, and 9.5 fantasy points per game in the last month of the season. It's been about as bad as it could possibly be for a guy like Lamar Jackson. So definitely a player I think a lot of people are looking at right now and saying, hey, this is not what I signed up for. This was a bad draft pick. This was a bad player to have on my team. And not because, we think Lamar is a bad player. It's just that's how the cookie has crumbled this year. And I think a lot of people are still going to like Lamar Jackson going into next year. But so far, 2025, if you had him, he has probably helped lose you your fantasy playoff spots.
Yeah, he has been a real bummer, and especially after that first game back. He had the 4 touchdown passes, and you were really excited about how things were looking, and then just since then it's been really tough in the past 3 games, especially 6.7 points, 7.2, 7.5. Just not what you're looking for out of him. I think the big thing too is he just hasn't been running. that's something that we've expected out of Lamar is just high end running numbers, and he just hasn't really run like he used to anymore. And I'm curious if that's a sign of things to come now that he's getting older and a little more advanced in his career, or if it's a blip coming off of an injury, or what it is. But that's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on long term.
Yeah, I think a little bit of maybe the hamstring injury wasn't as healed as we wanted it to be, but also I agree with you. It is a little bit of a yellow or an orange flag if you're looking at the long-term career of Lamar, because he's not super young anymore. He's not old by any means, but he's a player that's kind of getting to that point where it's like the dynasty community is going to devalue you once we start seeing the 30 in front of your name anyways. And if you get to that point as Lamar Jackson, and people have claimed, and I'm not making any claims one way or the other right now, but people have claimed you've elevated as a passer, and then in the games where you're not running, you haven't been able to pass the ball or score fantasy points. Like, I'm starting to get worried about Lamar Jackson long term. And like I said, I think there's going to be players and there's going to be people who get excited about him next year, and I think they should. The ceiling is as high as anybody, but I do think there's enough yellow flags where I might be a little bit more nervous about Lamar today than I was, just 6 months ago. And I think back of a move that I made last year coming off of Lamar's season, and I traded Lamar in a down tier move. It was a 6-point passing touchdown league, and I moved him for Patrick Mahomes, who people were down on after last season. And I got T. Higgins thrown in as the sweetener on top. So it was T and Mahomes for Lamar. I'm feeling real good about that today. But again, Lamar Jackson, it feels like, maybe we should have explored more as a community tear down options after that big year last year.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's go to the quarterback that I had as my most disappointing. And this one I'll put a little bit more in my own bucket, more so than the general community's bucket. Although I think there were other people that were hoping to see a nice step forward from this player this year. And look, I know everyone's going to be like, how is JJ McCarthy not one of your two quarterbacks? I know he's had a disappointing year, but I was looking more, a little more micro, and I went Michael Penix. I was a guy that I liked Michael Penix tape. I fell in love with the deep ball that he had. And I looked at this offense and I said, we have one of the better offensive lines in football. We have an elite running back in Bijan Robinson. We have what we thought was an elite tight end in Kyle Pitts, although we're not so sure now. And Drake London is one of the better wide receivers in football. So everything is set up for this to be good. We saw flashes in his rookie year, and man, it has just not been the case this year overall. Now, granted, some of these guys have only had, 3 and 4 starts, but on a points per game basis, Michael Penix is the 29th quarterback in points per game, 13.7 points. So when you're looking at who you could be starting in a very similar range, Aaron Rodgers just a little ahead of him. Bryce Young is a little bit ahead of him. And he's just ahead of Davis Mills, Mac Jones, Geno Smith. Like, it's just not been good for him this year. I thought we were going to see a step forward, and he either maintained, which, if you're looking at your rookie season, for most guys, maintaining your level as a rookie is not good, but he either maintained or possibly even took a step back. Then we had the injury on top of it, and the Falcons overall are just in a weird spot now too, because they've been so bad compared to expectations this year. So remember, this is a team that beat the Bills early on in the year. They have 3 wins, 4 wins. Like, there's a real chance that they clean house. They could start from scratch.
And no first round pick.
The Rams have that pick. So it could be a really weird situation. So who knows who the new coach could be? Maybe it's good for him. I don't know. But overall this season, he was definitely a huge disappointment for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with you too, where you say JJ McCarthy could fit there. Quite honestly, we could put pretty much everybody who wears purple and yellow in this episode, I think, today. Even, going all the way up to Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, all the way down to guys like me who wear purple and yellow at the house. Like, everybody's been disappointed this year. So Yeah, I mean, I agree with JJ McCarthy. I agree with Michael Penix. I think Michael Penix for sure is a player that I wasn't as high on coming out. I didn't love him as much as a player in that class. I had him as my sixth ranked quarterback in that class. But you're right. A lot of people got excited about the London and Penix connection and kind of how that would translate as far as fantasy points go. And for a lot of the year, it feels like it didn't really, equal to too much overall. I mean, London's been fine, but I think a lot of people expected a lot bigger of a breakout year from him as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think everything in Atlanta has been, outside of Bijan, he's still been very, very good. I know he had a stretch there where Algier seemed to get every single touchdown, so that was frustrating. But Bijan's still averaging like 20 points per game, so you can't be too upset with that. So let's move on. Speaking of a running back in Bijan Robinson, he's not going to be either one of our disappointments. But let's go to the running back position. Who did you have as your disappointing running back?
Yeah, speaking of a running back who is getting every touchdown taken away from him right now, I'm going with Isiah Pacheco. And Isiah Pacheco, I know to a lot of people, was not somebody that people were excited about going into the season. I, on the other hand, thought this was an awesome buy low opportunity on Isiah Pacheco. I was wrong. So when I look at it right now with Pacheco, I had him everywhere. And that's why he's one of the more disappointing players for me. So, we talked about general. This one is personal with me and Isiah Pacheco today. I bought him basically in every rookie draft for draft picks when I was on the clock. I bought him in the offseason because I thought, you know what, worst case scenario, we have a player who was dealing with an injury last year, comes back as in one of the better offenses, and should at the minimum be able to get some touchdowns this year. And that has not went his way. I look at this season in general, running back 52 on the season right now. He's missed 3 games with an MCL sprain, so another injury this year that forced him to miss some time. Wasn't a serious one, but the fantasy points per game number has not been where you wanted it to be either. 7.3, which is 48th in the NFL from a fantasy points per game perspective. To put that into, a tangible number for you, Michael Carter in his starts has averaged 7.6 fantasy points per game, which is 3.3 fantasy points per game more than Isiah Pacheco has as the starter this year. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, a player who was a UDFA, 5th-round rookie pick, whatever you want it to be, 7.3 fantasy points per game, and he's been disappointing on UDFA preseason hype type of standards. And so Isiah Pacheco, it's been less than ideal. I look at the snap percentages this year, and this is really what's stood out to me as to maybe the reason why. Also, maybe it's just Isiah Pacheco's a UDFA or a 7th-round running back himself that hasn't really, been super talented, more of a short window guy. But he has 39.1% of the team's total snaps this year, behind Kareem Hunt, who's getting 48% of the snaps. So he has worked behind Hunt this year, not in a committee, ahead of him, not a 1A, 1B situation. He has been the B in this offense this year. And when you look at the touchdown department, 4-to-1 ratio where Hunt is outscoring Pacheco in the end zone. It has been 8 touchdowns for Kareem Hunt, 2 for Pacheco this year. So where you thought maybe good offense, touchdown potential, maybe bounce back from an injury, none of that has happened. And like I said, I was one of the, I felt like was going against the grain in the summer. Sometimes when you go against the grain, you can look real smart. Sometimes when you go against the grain, you can look real dumb. And I think this might be one of the ones where, yes, Andrew Mott looks real dumb trying to buy in on Isiah Pacheco this year. He's been very disappointing for me.
We all have those guys that humble us quite a bit. And this was my first year doing projections for the preseason and kind of projecting out season long where I thought guys would be. And I remember I posted a graphic of my top. It's like 30 or 32 running backs, and it did not have Isiah Pacheco in it. And somebody was like, "You're crazy. You don't have Isiah Pacheco in there." And then like 2 weeks later, he messaged back underneath. It was like, "Good call." And so look, sometimes these just work out, and sometimes these just don't. That's what makes this game fun. You can have guys that pay attention and study and do their homework and come to vastly different conclusions. And that's what makes trades happen. That's what makes the drafts fun. So sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. This one did not work out, and neither did my running back, Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker was a player that, when we were looking in the offseason, we were getting some really good vibes from this offense, and Kubiak coming in, and they were singing Kenneth Walker's praises. Well, so far this season, it has been the most committee-ish committee of all time. And Kenneth Walker, in fact, has been on like the annoying side of the committee because similar to Isiah Pacheco, he has not been getting the work along the goal line. His passes have been hit and miss. Like he's just not been getting the volume that you would expect. So when you're looking at a player that you're looking at as a legitimate running back too, and he's going to offer you, 14, 15 type points per game, and he's only averaging you 11 points per game, 11.2 to be exact. That's really, really frustrating. Now, things have been a tiny bit better the past few weeks, 20.1, 13.1, 10.4. So we're at least seeing double digits, but we had a stretch there of 5 straight weeks where he wasn't even hitting double digit points. So I think when you look at especially how much this offense runs, it's one of the most run-heavy offenses, and it might actually be the most run-heavy offense. I haven't checked after this week's games, but it might be the most run-heavy by a percentage in the NFL. And so the guy that you would expect to be the lead back in a team that's running the ball that much, just a really, really weird situation. I know there's a lot of people really disappointed with how things worked out for Kenneth Walker this year.
Yeah, you know what? You said you were not in on Pacheco. I was not in on Kenneth Walker in the summer. So, we were both on the wrong sides, or I guess on the right sides of each other's take. Maybe that's where we're at. But maybe we just need to, collaborate a little bit more in the offseason to try and get to our stuff. But yeah, I mean, with Kenneth Walker, I think he's a player that I kind of viewed a committee coming with Zach Charbonnet. I know that the vibes were, there was a lot of people singing the praise of Kenneth Walker, and it was tough for me to kind of buy in because of what we've seen over the last couple of years and, some of the injury concerns with Kenneth Walker as well. But yeah, anybody who even bought in to some of that, I know, you think of like in the summer when people are doing best ball drafts or people are doing single seasons, I know there was a point in time where Kenneth Walker was like a 4th or a 5th round pick, like all the way up the board. Oh, yeah. And if you got him at those points, there's a lot of players you wish you would have drafted over Kenneth Walker.
Fortunately, I don't have much Kenneth Walker, so it worked out okay. But definitely a player that, even though I didn't have a lot of shares, I thought he was going to be better than he was this year, and it definitely has not panned out. But let's move on to the wide receiver position. Who did you have at wide receiver that you're like, you know what, this just wasn't his year?
Yeah, I'm going Brian Thomas Jr. And I think this is more of like everybody feels this one if you had Brian Thomas coming off of that rookie season, because right now he's the wide receiver 50. And this is a player who not only has been disappointing because he missed time, but he was playing bad before the injury, after the injury. It hasn't been good for him all around. So he missed those 3 games with the ankle injury. There's a weird period where everybody was talking about there's this wrist injury that he never missed time for, but he was playing through the wrist injury, and that was contributing to the drops and things like that. It's just been weird vibes for Brian Thomas all year round. From a fantasy points per game perspective, he's averaging 10 fantasy points per game, which is the 47th best in the league right now, behind guys like Trey Tucker, behind guys like Kayshon Boutte, right? Just barely above guys like Hollywood Brown, who's the wide receiver 4 on his offense. And so I look at Brian Thomas and say, where did it go wrong? What happened? Because it was such a good back half of the year last year. But I also have to remember, Mac Jones was playing quarterback. It wasn't Trevor Lawrence. There was a different coach in the building. And I'm looking at the offensive and the personal woes for Brian Thomas and the Jaguars this year. Thomas has 1 touchdown on the season. That is part of the equation as to why this has went wrong. He hasn't gotten into the end zone, and he was getting into the end zone a lot at the back half of his rookie season. He's also number 1 in the NFL in drops right now with 9 drops. That's per player profiler. So he's number 1 in the NFL in drops, and he's 82nd in designed targets with just 1 designed target on the year so far, despite his team being a top 10 passing plays per game type of offense. So that's on Liam Cohen there. You want to get your best players the ball, especially when you have guys like Travis Hunter who are not healthy right now. Why are we not scheming some layups? Why are we not trying to get Brian Thomas the ball? And we haven't seen any games here this year, really outside of 1 or 2 games where he's seen over 5 catches. It's been 2-catch games, 1-catch game, 3-catch game for Brian Thomas Jr. all year. And I think, again, some of that comes to the designed offense not even going his way. So it's been a very bad year for Brian Thomas Jr. Some of it, definitely the drops and some of the other stuff, maybe attitude, things like that we're not seeing behind the scenes. I don't know. Some of that is on Brian Thomas Jr. Some of that is on the coach. Get your best players the ball. It's just not been a great situation all year. And I think it's been surprising for people because we looked at Liam Cohen as this massive upgrade. This was going to be a huge upgrade for the Jaguars and how their offense was going to run. And none of it has really been an upgrade so far for really many of these guys. Even Trevor Lawrence hasn't taken that leap forward for the most part. He's played a good couple of weeks of football over the last month or so, but he's also had some easier matchups.
It's an interesting one because last year I had a lot of crow for Brian Thomas Jr. because he finished as wide receiver 4, and I was not in on Brian Thomas Jr. I was pretty open about that. Like, I just didn't really believe in it. There was a lot of broken coverages on a lot of his big plays and things like that. But it's funny how things come full circle because now his value's gotten so low that I'm like, well, I'm kind of in now. Like, at this price, I'll buy. Like, things can't get much worse. You would expect them to fix some of these things in the offseason and get their players the ball a little more and, make this work. So it is funny how things are kind of, going full circle. But you're absolutely right. When you look at where people were drafting this guy in Dynasty and Best Ball and whatever, this was a second-round pick. This was somebody that guys were targeting. Teams wanted pieces of. It seemed like everybody was always trying to trade for Brian Thomas, but could never come to the right price point because it was just so expensive to get that player. And it's been a bummer. It's been a real bummer. And you have to ask yourself too, even though, like I said, I would kind of be willing to buy now at this point, what is it going to look like next year? Is Brian Thomas going to be the one, or are they going to fully move Travis Hunter into that wide receiver role? And now he's going to be the wide receiver 1, the true X. And Brian Thomas is going to play the Z, which honestly, his skill set leans more towards being a Z. He is more of that deep threat, take the top off the defense, beat the guy off the line of scrimmage. Like, that's his lane, in my opinion, on my scouting notes. So we'll see how all of this kind of comes together, plays out. But it's definitely, from where the expectations were for Brian Thomas, huge letdown in 2025 for sure.
Yeah, and even the people who were not in at the top prices, this is still disappointing based off of even the most modest of expectations. I'm sure even you, like you said, you ate a lot of crow. I'm sure even you didn't expect it to be wide receiver 50 this season.
No, I think I had him, even though I was lower on him, I think I had him at 15. Like,
exactly.
Still a very solid wide receiver 2. So yeah, definitely crazy how that kind of all played out. One of I think you could argue that he might be the most disappointing player this season, period, regardless of position. I think he's definitely up there. And it's funny, we look at how good that rookie class was last year, seemingly legendary class. But right now you have guys like Malik Neighbors, who just can't seem to stay on the field. Romo Dunze, who's especially back half of the season has been disappointing. We just talked about Brian Thomas Jr. And now I'm going to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr., a guy that, was a darling for me. Like, highest wide receiver score I've ever given to a prospect. Highest wide receiver score ever. And while, yes, there's been some injuries and some weird offensive stuff, like, at the end of the day, you gotta make plays. I know you had an appendectomy and like it's been weird. All of it's been weird. But right now, Marvin Harrison Jr. on a points per game basis, wide receiver 28. So we're not even getting wide receiver 2 numbers out of him. We're getting high-end wide receiver 3 numbers out of him. 12.5 points per game. So definitely nothing to write home about. He's been better lately, but that's still not great when you have games in there where you scored 4.7 points and 5.2 points. Yes, a 22-point game helps out, but it's been wildly inconsistent. The floor doesn't seem to be there, and there's very few ceiling games there. And Trey McBride has really become the number 1 option in the offense. Now, we'll see what happens. Who knows who their quarterback's going to be next year? Who knows who their offensive coordinator is going to be next year? A lot could change there. But realistically, even though I think the expectations were much lower this year for Marvin Harrison Jr. than Brian Thomas Jr., I still think we thought we would get a step up this year, and it just looks more of the same from his rookie year.
Yeah, I think he's one of the players that just in general, when you look at career, even not just this year, it's just been disappointing. Like all the way from the beginning. This is a player who came in immediately and people were like, he's going to enter the Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson tier. Like he's going to be that type of guy. And he's never even sniffed that type of production, never been near that. And it's just been so rough for Marvin Harrison. And you look at the situation in Arizona too, moving forward. Who's the quarterback long term? Is it Kyler? Do they go with Kyler at the start of next year? Does Kyler get traded in the offseason? If, Kyler's not the guy, is it Brissett? Is Brissett, I'm unfamiliar whether or not he's a free agent this offseason, but does he get a contract? Do they go for a rookie? Like, what happens here in Arizona? There is so much going on, and it's tough when you see guys like Michael Wilson who step in and start getting fed targets and producing immediately. Like, what is happening to where Michael Wilson can step in as the number one when you go down, Marvin, and be this high-end fantasy producer, but then when you're the number one guy, we're not getting that high-end production. It's so confusing. It's hard to look at. It's hard to read. It's a player that I think people are still, despite everything that the data is showing us and we're watching with our two eyes, people are going to still say he has an elite high-end, range of outcomes. Sure. And it's starting to feel like, for me, I don't believe that anymore. I don't know if he actually does have this high-end range of outcomes. Can he still be a good player? Absolutely. Is he going to be a guy that I feel confident in as a wide receiver one for my Dynasty fantasy football roster? Probably not.
Yeah, it's a really, really big question mark, and I'm starting to get close to that as well. I don't think I'm quite as down as you are, but I'm not far off, man. It has been really disappointing. It has been really, really disappointing, and there's just so many question marks moving forward. And some of it comes down to, you look at the attitude of some of these players, and we don't know all of it, but receiver, you want them to be a little bit selfish. You want them to make their own way and make their own path and, force things.
Give me the ball.
And he's just not and that's just not his makeup seemingly. He's much more passive, much more laid back, much more chill, which is fine if you're playing guard, it's fine, but if you're the kicker, cool. But if you're a wide receiver, I want you to want the ball. I want you to be making ridiculous plays and comments and things like that at times. I want that out of you. We're just not seeing it. Hopefully that changes, or maybe you can just overcome. His dad wasn't as much that kind of guy either and had a great career, but he also had Peyton Manning throwing him the football. The odds of a Peyton Manning coming to the Cardinals is not looking good right now. So we'll see how everything plays out, but definitely disappointing so far and what we would expect to finish out this year. So let's go ahead and go to the tight end position. Who do you have as your guy that just kind of let you down?
Yeah, I said everybody wearing purple and yellow could be on this episode, and so I wouldn't get out of this episode without putting somebody on the list, and for me, it's TJ Hockenson. TJ Hockenson has been very, very disappointing this year, but I think I have some arguments for it not necessarily being TJ's fault. It being more of the offensive environment, the offensive efficiency, the quarterback play, because when I look at TJ Hockenson right now, yes, he's the tight end 21. He hasn't produced. And I remember making a video with you early on, before the season started, talking about TJ Hockenson still being a top 5, top 6, top 7-ish dynasty tight end. And then we just recently did our tight end tier list, and I think he was tier 4 or 5 down the board. We were not high on TJ Hockenson as much anymore. And the reason why is because he goes out this year, fantasy points per game, 7.7 fantasy points right now. It's 25th in the NFL. The lowest fantasy points per game numbers he has posted since his rookie year in 2019. And it's worse fantasy production than we've been getting out of guys like Theo Johnson and A.J. Barner. Those guys have outscored him by a decent amount this year as well. And so I look at TJ Hockenson. I'm trying to, pull the hood up and look underneath and try and figure out, why is this happening right now? Has he lost a step? Did the injury that he suffered, is it still lingering this year? I don't think so. This is a player who's still top 10 right now in target separation. He's top 12 in designed target share. So Kevin O'Connell's getting him the football or trying to get him the football. He's top 15 in red zone targets. He's top 10 in snap share. He's top 12 in routes run. He's top 5 in drops. But this is also a Vikings offense that's averaging 18.7 points per game, which is 28th in the NFL. So I think right now with TJ Hockenson, the way I'm looking at him, I actually think he's a buy. He's a player that I really like as a potential bounce back candidate moving forward. You have to think that Minnesota is going to do something to address and improve this offense in the offseason, because it's not going to happen this year in 2025. I think right now, everything that I'm feeling as a fan, everything that I think most people are looking at is this is the team that's going to be playing for the draft right now. Who can we get in the NFL draft, and how can we come back next year and try and be competitive? He's also a player that I think is interesting because his contract is a little bit funky for where the Vikings are right now based off of this year. He's making a lot of money, and you could argue that he's a player that could potentially be a trade candidate in the offseason, could maybe be a cap casualty if they go some way around that. I don't think they'll full-on cut him, but he's a player that's just he's in a weird spot, I think, with this team. It doesn't fully fit the age of a young rookie quarterback or a guy on a rookie contract, and is making a lot of money. And they got to pay some guys, and they have paid some guys. So he's a player that I think is interesting. Definitely, I think a player that's been very disappointing because, like I said, when you have TJ Hockenson on your team, you are not expecting the tight end 21. You're not expecting, worse production than Theo Johnson. But I do think he's a player that the underlying numbers tell me he's playing fine. The offense has been so bad. The quarterback play has been bad. And it wasn't even better, for the record, underneath Carson Wentz. Whoever has suited up under center for the Vikings this year, it just hasn't been good in general. So player that I'm interested in buying in the offseason, but he's been so disappointing in 2025.
Yeah, he really has been a bummer. And I think you're right in your evaluation that it's less TJ and more the environment, because I was this close to putting not JJ McCarthy. Well, yes, but Justin Jefferson as my wide receiver.
Yes.
And so I think it's the same thing plaguing him. Do I think Justin Jefferson's a bad receiver? No, he's one of the best receivers in the NFL. But at some point, there's only so much you can do as a pass catcher. They have to get the ball in your vicinity, and you have to get it with regularity. And if you're not getting those things, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're Jerry Rice. It doesn't matter if you're Megatron. It doesn't matter if you're Randy Moss. It's just not going to happen. So I think that's the point that we're kind of at with a lot of the pass catchers. JJ's been bad. And even the guys that have come in, Wentz was okay, but then he got hurt, and that kind of really started to spiral quickly. And we had Brosmer, or however you pronounce his last name.
Max Brosmer, dude.
Yeah.
Horrible.
That was one of the worst NFL quarterback performances I've seen, and I'm a Browns
I remember there were people saying, like, it won't get much worse than JJ McCarthy. It got worse, folks. It got worse.
It got worse.
Yeah.
It was like he was handing the ball to the other team at times. So it's been bad. It's been really, really bad, and it's been really unfortunate to see for TJ Hockenson, because I do still think he's a good player. And you're right. If, of the players on this list, there's certain ones that I'm willing to buy. Actually, there's a decent amount of them that I'm still willing to go out and buy. I'm still interested in maybe Kenneth Walker on the low now that he's going to be a free agent. Different guys like that. Like, there's players that I'm interested in. I think TJ Hockenson fits that mold.
Yeah, and I think that's something to, again, reemphasize. Disappointing does not mean bad. Disappointing does not mean we're out on them for fantasy football. It just means that they failed to meet the expectations in which either we had for them this year or somebody, the community, had for them this year. And I think what that does is, like you said, it opens up opportunities to where if you do say, hey, the market is readjusted. I didn't like Brian Thomas at that price. Now I do. Like, this gives you the opportunity to get in on different players and make different assessments. And that is the whole game in which we play. You have to keep making these different rapidly changing evaluations of players and opportunities and situations. And so I think that's guys who disappoint and guys who overperform on the opposite side of the spectrum. Those are opportunities opening themselves for trades in your league. So just because we say they are disappointing in 2025 doesn't mean that you can't, or you shouldn't, or we won't go try and get an opportunity to add one of these players to our teams at the right price.
Absolutely. Last one here for the most disappointing player show is I think this one was both a me guy and a macro. Like, the community was in on this player. But I was definitely like leading the train. I was all about it because we saw what David Njoku did a couple of years ago with Joe Flacco. We saw what he was doing with any quarterback not named Deshaun Watson last year. Was averaging close to 15 points per game with any quarterback that wasn't him. And so I figured worst case scenario, we're going to be getting a 13, 14 point per game asset here. And man, things had just not worked out. Part of it is because we added Harold Fannin. That is a big aspect of this overall. But when you look at what we've gotten here, 7.2 points per game. That was half of what I thought we could be seeing from him this year. I thought he was going to push potentially as a top 3 and maybe even the number 1 overall tight end this season. It has not happened. On a points per game basis, tight end 26. So if you're even in a 2 tight end league, he hasn't been startable. Like it's been really rough. It's been really, really rough. Dylan Gabriel has not done him any favors. Shador, we'll see what happens with Shador. We had Flacco in there for a bit, and even those two guys weren't connecting like they were before. And like I mentioned, Harold Fannin has taken a good amount of tight end targets away from David Njoku and kind of made them both unusable, unfortunately, for fantasy football. So it has been a disappointing year to say the least for David Njoku.
Yeah, I think a player like we talked about earlier, I think we both kind of saw potential, some opportunity there. It's not like Cleveland has a bunch of like all-world wide receivers that we thought were going to take a bunch of targets, and it just hasn't worked out either. And a lot of the numbers that you say have been worse than what I just mentioned with TJ Hockenson. So you're talking about how bad TJ's been. He's been a little bit worse than TJ. Now, obviously, the expectations were probably not as high, I don't think, for most people. But yeah, just a player overall, very disappointing this year. And I think it's tough for him. He's a player that I also kind of look at and I'm like, it's tough for me to tell you where this is going to move forward for Dynasty. Like, is he going to be a player who sticks around in Cleveland? If he does, is this kind of what we're looking at moving forward, him sharing with a guy like Harold Fannin? If not, is he a player who hits free agency? Where does he go? Like, is there somewhere where it could be a better situation, or does a team bring him in to be another guy with somebody? Like, it's just such a weird situation to try and project with him. Probably, we talked about players that I'd probably be buying right now. I don't know if I'm touching or buying a guy like Njoku at the moment.
It all depends on the price and whether or not you think he's going to stay or go in free agency, because he could go somewhere else and all of a sudden it could be great for him. But you're right. If he stays put, welcome to backup tight end for the rest of your career territory. Like,
yeah,
look, it could be rough.
Let Kelsey retire and Chief Njoku can go be a Chief in Kansas City with Mahomes. That would be the best situation for everybody.
Oh yeah, that would be fantastic. Honestly, David Njoku would do very, very well in that situation, and I think Patrick Mahomes would love a guy like that. So yeah, we'll see how this all plays out. But guys, that was our most disappointing players of 2025 episode. I know that there was a lot of other names. We even mentioned some other names that we could have thrown into this list, but let us know below, who were your most disappointing players? I want one of each. Give me a quarterback, give me a running back, give me a receiver, give me a tight end. Who was most disappointing for you? Maybe not the entire community, but for you personally, who let you down this year? We appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.